In a previous video, we looked at the data that we need to conduct analysis. And there were two main ways to acquire this data. One way was by means of experimentation, and the other way was by means of gathering data that comes from observation of the business operations. Observations of the business operations are actually the cheapest way to acquire data because this data is simply there, but this data usually leads to relationships between variables. And this is oftentimes not extremely useful when one tries to understand the mechanism and one tries to predict what is going to happen. Instead, experimental data is more valuable, but is harder to acquire. Two main advantages of experimental data is that it allows you to see causal relationship between independent and dependent variables. And experiments are better controlled to gather information, to gather data, to run inference afterwards. However, oftentimes experiments are not executed correctly. For this reason, I want to go through 7 points that might help you to better prepare and launch your experiments. The first point is to ask the questions in the more concise and concrete manner, and also with a quantitative perspective in mind. Instead of asking general questions, you better go for questions that are very specific about one very specific topic, and then that usually the answer is one concrete metric. Instead of posing questions like, is advertisement worth the cost? We should ask questions as, how much advertisement increase our sales per month? The second point is to make the intervention of your experiments noticeable. For example, if you're trying to see if customers are reacting to a label that you're putting on a product, make sure that this label is big enough so the effect that you see on your customers is noticeable. Number 3 is to audit your data for absence as well as for presence. If you're looking for the relationship between two variables and then you observe that certain effects take place, then you want to see what is the result, what is the impact that this is creating. But you also want to observe what happens if you don't have that effect and if that also reflects in the dependent variable. Number 4 is to be aware of the population that is being chosen for one study. Imagine that you choose a population where everyone is wearing red shoes and then you ask what is the favorite color among that population. Well, if your result is that most people tend to prefer the red color, then it's not surprised because obviously you are seeing bias in that sample. So be aware of choosing a population that doesn't have bias so you can have the more objective results possible. Number 5 is to randomize your study. It's important that you choose the control and the treatment groups in a random way. If it's possible, make sure that the subjects as well as the experimenters do not know who are the control and the treatment groups. This decreases the bias in the experiment and increases the quality of your results. But double blind is not always possible. So in any case, try always to randomize who goes to control, who goes to treatment, and also the way that you choose your sample. Number 6 is be sensitive about the length that you are using to run your experiment. Make sure that you are not running the experiment until you see the desired effect. Let me give you one example. Say that you are tossing coins and you run an experiment in which you are going to stop after tossing 10 heads. This is going to give you a different result as if you were tossing the coin 100 times and then counting how many heads you got. So keep this in mind because this has led to some non-desirable results, like for instance, the replicability crisis that one observes in psychology. Number 7, try to answer the question, does the data reveal what the mechanism is? Use the information that you get out of this experiment, and with that, try to interpret what is the mechanism that is behind the process you are observing. What is the relationship between the independent variables, the dependent variables? And focus just on the data that the experiment gives you. Finally, experiments have been extremely successful in social science. In business organizations, experiments can actually give an edge in terms of how you compete, how do you deploy resources in regards to other participants in the market.